You wake up already tired, not from yesterday, but from something that has no clear starting point. It is not the kind of tired that a good night of sleep fixes or a weekend away solves. It sits behind your eyes, in the way you pause before answering simple questions, in the weight of small decisions. You are 23 or 27 or 31, and people around you seem to be operating on a different frequency entirely. They are loud in a way that feels foreign to you, excited about things that feel thin to you, unbothered in a way you genuinely cannot locate inside yourself. You watch them and feel something that is not quite envy and not quite judgment, more like quiet bewilderment. You have felt older than your age for as long as you can remember, and nobody ever gave that feeling a clean name. As a child, you were the one sitting slightly apart at birthday parties, watching the noise rather than being inside it. You were the one adults called mature for your age, as if that was a compliment, as if it was a choice you made. You listened more than you talked, and you thought about things longer than the situation probably required. You went home and replayed conversations, not out of anxiety exactly, but out of some reflex to understand what just happened. Other kids seemed to live inside the moment with their whole body, and you were always slightly behind the glass. Not unhappy necessarily, just elsewhere. Watching, processing, carrying something nobody asked you to carry. That pattern did not go away when you got older. It just got more furniture around it. Now you sit in group settings and feel the familiar distance settling in. That slight remove, that observer's position you never chose. Someone makes a joke and the table erupts, and you smile because it was funny, but something in you is already somewhere else. You are calculating something or feeling something you cannot name fast enough, or noticing a dynamic nobody else seems to notice. The group moves on before you have finished processing where you just were, and you follow, but you are always a half step behind the energy. People call this introversion sometimes, or sensitivity, or social anxiety, and some of those words fit partially. But they do not catch the specific texture of it, the feeling that you have already lived through versions of this moment before. Not déjà vu exactly. More like a deep familiarity with the shape of human situations, a tiredness with patterns you have seen repeat. You already know how this conversation ends. You already know what that person is about to say. You already know how the night is going to feel at 2 in the morning. And knowing that, really feeling it in advance, is exhausting in a way that is difficult to explain without sounding dramatic. So you mostly do not explain it. You say you are tired. You say you are not feeling social. You say you have a lot going on. These are not lies exactly, but they are translations. The real sentence is longer and harder to hand to someone over a beer. There is a specific loneliness in this. Not the loneliness of being alone. You are often fine alone, genuinely fine, quieter, and more yourself. The loneliness is in conversation. In the gap between what you are actually thinking and what is actually appropriate to say. You are at a party and someone asks what you have been up to, and in your head there is a real answer, something honest, something with weight. But you read the room, and the room is not built for that answer right now, so you give the other version, the lighter one, and smile. And then you drive home with the window cracked, and feel that specific kind of alone that is not about being by yourself. Some of this has roots. Not everyone who feels old before their time arrived there the same way, but there are patterns worth naming. Some of you grew up fast because you had to. There was no one available to carry the weight, so you picked it up. You became the one who stayed calm in chaos, the one who read the room, the one who made sure things were okay. You learned to track other people's emotional states before you fully understood your own, because that skill had practical value early on. And skills that kept you safe do not quietly retire when the danger passes. They just keep running in the background, always on, always scanning. The exhaustion is partly that. The cost of running a program continuously that most people only boot up occasionally. But not all of it is wound. Some of it is just wiring. Some people are genuinely built with a longer internal processing time. They need to think more before they feel settled. They feel the weight of time more acutely. They carry the past more carefully. This is not pathology. It is a different relationship with existence, one that has real costs but is not automatically broken. The mistake is when this pattern starts making decisions for you, when the tiredness becomes an excuse to stop before you start, when the knowing in advance becomes a reason not to try because you have already run the simulation and it ended the way things usually end. That is where the pattern quietly shifts from a trait into a trap, and it is easy to miss that transition because it feels like wisdom. It feels like realism, like you are just being honest about how things work, unlike the naive people around you who still believe in things. But there is a version of that realism that is just protection wearing a philosophical coat, avoidance dressed in the language of knowing better. You have seen how things go, and that experience is real, but experience is not the same as outcome, and the future is not a repeat of the file. The person who has been carrying weight for 20 years starts to believe that carrying is the only mode available to them. They forget or never learned that lightness is not immaturity, that not knowing the ending is not naivete, that presence is not the same as ignorance. There is a specific grief in this pattern that rarely gets named, the grief of never fully arriving in your own age, of being 17 and already 40 inside, of being 30 and feeling like you skipped something everyone else got to have. Not a dramatic grief, not something that makes you cry in the shower, more like a low background hum of having missed something you cannot name. You see younger people being reckless, and instead of judgment, something quieter moves through you, something almost like longing. Not for the recklessness itself, but for the specific freedom of not yet knowing what recklessness costs. There is a version of you that never got to be careless, never got to throw yourself at something without calculating the landing first. And you cannot go back and get that. That particular window has a one-way hinge, and you have been aware of it closing since you were 15. So you watch, and you feel the distance, and you call yourself mature because that is the word that makes the loss sound like a gain. The relationships are complicated too. You connect deeply or barely at all. There is not much in between for you. Small talk feels like standing in a shallow pool when you would rather be somewhere with actual depth, somewhere you can actually swim. You meet someone, and within 20 minutes you either feel something real or you feel nothing, and pretending otherwise costs you energy you do not have. So your social circle tends to be small, and some people read that as coldness or arrogance, and you have stopped correcting them. You have learned that explaining yourself fully to someone who is not already capable of receiving it just produces a new kind of loneliness. So you stay quiet in the places where quiet feels safer, and you go deep in the places that have proven they can hold it. And you get very good at identifying those places quickly, at reading whether a person or room has that capacity before you invest. That skill is real, and it serves you, but it can also become a wall that you call a filter, a closing that you call discernment. Because some things only reveal their depth after the surface bores you, and if you leave at the surface, you never find out. The pattern also shows up in how you handle rest. You do not fully rest. You sit down, but you do not arrive. You are on the couch, but your mind is 3 conversations ahead, or 2 weeks back, or somewhere in the architecture of a problem you have not solved yet. You watch something light on a screen and feel vaguely guilty, as if lightness requires justification, as if you owe the universe productivity. Rest feels like a pause between obligations, not a state you are allowed to actually inhabit, and that distinction slowly accumulates into a kind of bone tiredness, not burnout exactly, more like never having fully charged because you were always running something in the background. You have probably been told you think too much. You have probably nodded and said yeah, probably, and then kept thinking. Because from the inside it does not feel like too much. It feels like the necessary amount. It feels like how you make sure nothing slips. The people who think less seem to you to simply be less aware of what is happening, and you are not sure that blissful ignorance is actually a model worth copying. But here is the thing, and this requires some honesty. The thinking is not always awareness. Sometimes it is just the mind refusing to be still. Sometimes the analysis is not insight. It is the brain doing what it learned to do in environments where stillness was not safe. And the difference between genuine depth and anxious processing can be very hard to feel from the inside, because both feel like thinking. One of the quieter costs of this pattern is that you become very good at understanding other people and somewhat opaque to yourself. You have mapped everyone around you in fine detail, their patterns, their needs, their emotional weather, and your own interiority is a room you pass through quickly, not because you are uninterested in yourself. Because slowing down in that room sometimes surfaces things you would rather keep at a manageable distance. So you stay in motion, you stay useful, you stay thoughtful about everyone else, and the self-knowledge accumulates slowly, sideways, in unguarded moments. A line in a book, a conversation that hits somewhere unexpected, a long drive where the radio cuts out and something rises. If any of this is something you are sitting with right now, this video is for reflection, not a replacement for actual support from someone trained to help. Some of what drives this pattern can be worked through with the right kind of help, and there is no wisdom in carrying alone what you do not have to carry alone. But here is what is also true and worth sitting with before you close this. You are not defective for feeling this way. The tiredness is real. The distance is real. The grief of moving through life at a different tempo than the people around you is real. What is worth questioning is not the feeling itself, but the story you have built on top of it, the story that says this is permanent and fixed, that you are constitutionally incapable of lightness, that rest is not for you, that depth requires suffering as its proof. Because those are not observations. Those are conclusions you reached a long time ago in a context that may no longer apply. The soul that arrived tired learned to survive in a particular kind of weather. That is not weakness, that is intelligence under pressure. But weather changes, and the strategies built for one climate do not always serve you in another. You are allowed to update the forecast. You are allowed to be tired and still arrive. You are allowed to be old inside and still be new to some things. The weight you have been carrying is real. The question is whether all of it still belongs to you, or whether some of it can finally be set down. Not dramatically, not in a single decision, but quietly, incrementally, in the small moments where you choose presence over prediction. Where you let the conversation go somewhere you have not mapped. Where you sit in the room without scanning it first. Where you let yourself not know the ending just once and find out what it feels like to be inside a moment rather than already past it. That is not regression. That is not naivete. That is not undoing the intelligence. This pattern built in you over years. That is just finally giving the younger version of you something they never got. Permission to be in the present tense.